There is exactly one Jack Black in the world, and he is special. In our clip this week, we find Mr. S, Jack Black, who finds himself in an unlikely set of circumstances for which he is ill-equipped. He discovers some connection. He discovers the place where his actual skill set and the gifts of his students intersect. And a light goes on. Possibility presents itself. But it requires him to bend the rules a bit, to think differently than the uptight environment with strict rules and uniforms and high standards. In doing so, he highlights something they've missed otherwise. Some joy, some life, some creativity that wasn't previously there. Do I need to say out loud that I can relate? So, how does that connect with our scriptures? A place where Jesus seems to be doubling down on the rules versus breaking them to nurture the fertile ground of creativity. And are we really going to compare Jack Black to Jesus? No, not really. However, both characters do seem to be pointing to the question of what's really important here. And to be clear, it's not really an either-or kind of question. Let's not fall into the trap of false binaries. Instead, this scripture reading and this clip call me back to another scripture lesson we studied recently. The one where Jesus talks about keeping the outside of the cup sparkling clean and the inside remains dirty, calling us to think about our motives, not just our behaviors, but our hearts. It would seem that Jesus is always calling us to the bigger picture. It's not just if we can follow these bare minimum rules of decency, don't kill people, don't sleep with someone else's spouse, but what's going on inside? Where's your heart? What are your thoughts? Have you heard the saying that goes, watch your thoughts, they become your words. Watch your words, they become your actions. Watch your actions, they become your habits. Watch your habits, they become your character. Watch your character, it becomes your destiny. Lao Tzu. By the way, this was written in 571 BC, so it's not a new idea, friends. Well, let's pause for a moment. We can read this scripture and this quote and begin to feel a certain pressure, a certain anxiety maybe, like the lines between which I need to live my life are getting more and more narrow, like now I can't even have a thought without getting in trouble. What does Jesus really expect from us? Do we have to be perfect? Take a breath, everyone. If any thoughts or feelings like these came up for you, let's reorient for a moment. First, Jesus' whole message is always, forevermore, always has been, always will be wrapped up in grace, right? So your eternal fate isn't dependent on getting all this right. Again, your eternal fate is not dependent on getting all this right, and it certainly has nothing to do with perfection. Instead, we have an invitation toward kingdom, toward living into a faith and trust that is challenging to do in a world with so many problems. Second, if Jesus is drawing our attention back to our thoughts and motives, these are the things we have the ability to work on and change. We may not be able to fix other people, places, or things. We may not be able to solve poverty and homelessness in our world or even in our community, but we can get our own head on straight, and that is a good and holy place to start. That is how we will move toward kingdom, something that is always an invitation, but gospel will never coerce us toward with fear and threat. And when we do that, when we focus on in first, then maybe we are finally equipped to do something out with integrity. I have to wonder if these invitations are more about each one's maturity in their journey, if they can receive it as threat or loving advice and encouragement. I can't be sure. Certainly, I don't know what your experience is, but I can tell you in my own story that the more gentle I have become with myself, the more spiritual practices, loving relationships, the more in touch I am with my truest identity, the more I hear these scriptures and God's voice as gentle and loving. And that feels way more accurate than the threatening ultimatum God I've heard preached elsewhere. Maybe this is what Jesus is continually crafting within us and inviting us to explore. It's what's happening inside. How we can craft our own internal garden toward being the fertile soil for the mustard seed of faith, for good news. Have you ever noticed that if you're feeling really defensive, just about anything can feel like a slight or an insult? And if you're feeling kind and patient and rested, just about anything can roll off your back. There's no standard formula for crafting that kind of space within. It's likely a bit different for each of us. And all of us have different constraints, our work, our finances, or kids, or whatever it is we face each day that can get in our way. But each of us has the ability to examine our own thinking. After worship last week, I had a conversation with a gentleman to whom I said, "Man, how are you so sane?" And his response was, "It's a choice. A choice." Maybe that's what God is calling us back to, what Jesus is calling us back to again and again. We have a choice. We don't always like our choices, but we do have them. Sometimes we just have to be willing to look for it, to believe in some gentleness in the midst of a world that seems anything but, to decide we are going to be gentle and kind and loving despite what else the world or others decide, to actively seek something different and unexpected right in the midst of all that seems so unmovable, so stuck, so set. Maybe we have to be a bit like Mr. S, looking for giftedness, creativity, and possibility right in the midst of what appears to be the opposite. It's not unlike the journey of this church. Just 1 year ago, we were living the story of so many churches, a shrinking congregation, a decaying building, and dwindling funds. Some of you were there. And we dared to dream it could be different. We dared to see an alternative future, a unique potential, a gently held idea that our fate could be different. So yeah, it's not just about if we can follow the rules. There's something underneath them. There's who we are and how we relate, how we behave on the day-to-day, how we treat those around us, how we think about ourselves and others. Jesus is calling us to look beyond a series of do's and don'ts into an understanding of our identity as children of God. I'd like to hear from you all. What has provoked you? What is provoking you as you experience the scripture and this clip? What new idea are you having? How can we learn from each other? That's the benefit of coming together in community, is our shared experience. We can lean on each other. So for real, not rhetorically, I want to hear from you all. What's provoking you as you hear a scripture that says, it's not just if you kill somebody, it's if you think angry thoughts? Or you watch Mr. S pull these kids out of a stuffy orchestra class and into a rock band. Yeah, Peter. Jesus' context under Jewish law, yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. All right. Is more the fact that the laws aren't necessarily what you need to live by. You need to live by being, being a good person, being like Christ. And that's kind of what he's more getting at than necessarily, well, I guess you're all condemned. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, and thank you for saying that, because I think that's reflective of the times that we're living in. There's a lot of people walking around wearing the label Christian or the popular jewelry that's associated with that. And they're saying, well, I follow all these commandments. I want to put them up in public places. And what's your behavior? Are you being the example of this loving, merciful, healing, reaching to the margins, inclusive, arms wide open Jesus? I read a reflection this morning, Richard Rohr. You guys already know I love him. But he says, when we profess Jesus Christ, do you realize that's two professions? It's the man Jesus who walked and lived in those contexts, and it's the Christ who's in all, through all, and with all. Inviting us to live into this, not just to say, here's this solid standard that is literally accurate and we must all live by. Thank you, Peter. Any others? Y'all don't want to preach today? Good. You don't have to. You don't have to. I just wanted to tell you one other just anecdote. I recently saw a meme on Facebook, which would be a very dangerous place to spend your time, but it said, let's all play Christian roulette. Open the Bible to somewhere, point your finger, and then do exactly what it says. You guys, we've got to have some kind of lens through which we read this stuff. Because what if your finger lands on, when your kid disobeys, take them out the city walls and stone them? That's in there. So I'll remind you again, because not everybody here is Presbyterian or heard this before, but in this church, what we believe is that the ultimate authority is the message of this Christ, is Christ, which is always love and inclusive and grace and reaching out to those who have less, who need love, who need healing, and a faith that there will be enough, that the Father is in me and I am in the Father, all of these pieces of who Christ invites us to be. Christ is our ultimate authority. Then Scripture. So anything that disagrees in Scripture that you read, that disagrees with Christ, we go with Christ. And then our book of confessions. We're going to talk about some of our book of confessions when we start our next series in fall. If it disagrees with Scripture or Christ. And the last one, and then I'll come to Helen here, is the book of order. So that's our rules by which we govern ourselves in the Presbyterian Church. But if you find that it disagrees with anything above it, we still go with Christ. Go ahead, Helen.
Just one thing that was so helpful to me in the past was what was happening, who was Jesus speaking to, what was going on right then and there, and look at it that way.
Yeah. It gives us a different gives us a different invitation when we look at the context, because it's not a one-to-one. 2,000 years ago and now, 10 years ago and now, it's not a one-to-one. So we've got to have a lens and some discernment through which we look and read these things. Thank you for sharing. I've got one more here. Go ahead, Kathy. He's bringing you a mic so we can all hear you. Thanks.
Well, I'm Catholic and I go to Mass before I come here. The bottom line with all of the rules and everything is that your conscience is the final determinant.
Yeah, your conscience. So it's about crafting within us, the divine that's within each of us, that we might make good decisions, right? That we can trust who we are and what we decide. That it might look like this love from which we come. Thank you. I'm going to invite our musicians back up, and they're going to invite us to see the love.